It was one of those late nights when the city felt eerily quiet, the kind of night that lingers with a sense of unease. The usual hustle and bustle of the world outside had faded, leaving behind a suffocating stillness. Hours before the night would give way to the first hints of dawn, I found myself leaving a casual party, feeling the weight of too much alcohol and not enough sleep. I knew better than to drive myself home in my state, so I opened my ride-sharing app and booked the nearest taxi, thinking it was the safer, smarter choice. When the taxi arrived, I felt a wave of relief. The street was empty except for the glow of distant streetlights, and the cab seemed like a beacon of safety in the darkness. The driver was a middle-aged man, probably in his early 40s, wearing a dark baseball cap that hid most of his features. His face was blank, almost like a mask. He didn't speak a word as I got into the back seat, just nodded and began driving without so much as a glance in my direction. There was something strange about his demeanor, but at that moment, I was just happy to have some peace and quiet after an exhausting evening. The last thing I wanted was conversation. The car started moving, the soft hum of the engine filling the silence. I leaned back in the seat, staring out the window as the city slipped away behind us. It felt like I was being carried through an empty, quiet world, like the taxi was moving between two realms, one that existed in the daytime, and one that existed only in the darkness of night. The ride began to take an unusual turn. I noticed the familiar streets, the ones I usually took home, were slipping away, replaced by unfamiliar paths. The taxi veered off the main road, and before I knew it, we were driving down narrow, dimly lit side streets. I tried to shake off the uneasy feeling settling in my chest, telling myself it was just a shortcut, a minor detour. But then, the lights outside began to fade. The street lights disappeared, swallowed by the endless expanse of darkness. It was so dark that I couldn't even see the pavement beneath the car. The city had vanished, replaced by a thick, suffocating fog that seemed to enshroud everything. I glanced out the window again and realized there were no more houses, no more signs of life. Just pure, oppressive blackness. I felt a pang of panic. "Hey," I said, trying to break the silence, "is this a shortcut?" My voice broke the stillness, but it didn't seem to affect the driver. He didn't answer, didn't even acknowledge me. It was as though he hadn't heard me at all, or perhaps just didn't care. The silence grew heavier, more suffocating, until it felt like the air itself was thickening around me. I shifted nervously in my seat, trying to ignore the sense that something was terribly wrong. I stared at the rearview mirror, but all I saw were the vague outlines of the driver's face, barely visible beneath the cap. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, and there was something hollow about his gaze, like there was nothing behind those eyes at all. I quickly looked away, unease gnawing at me. But it wasn't just the driver's strange behavior that unnerved me. It was the overwhelming sense of being trapped in an inescapable place. It started as a subtle feeling like someone was watching me. At first, I couldn't place it, but then it grew more intense. My skin tingled with the sensation of eyes on me, even though I was alone in the back seat. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But when I glanced into the rearview mirror again, I saw something that made my blood run cold. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a figure behind me, just beyond my shoulder. It was faint, barely perceptible, but I swear I saw the outline of something or someone hiding in the shadows of the back seat. My heart skipped a beat. I whipped around, panic rising in my chest, but there was nothing. No figure. Just the empty seat and the dense blackness of the night outside. I turned back to the mirror, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks on me. But then I noticed something else. A smell. It was overpowering, musty and foul, like something decaying. The air in the car felt thick with it. I couldn't place the source, but it was so strong it made my stomach churn. My skin crawled as I realized the smell was coming from the back seat. It was as though something or someone had been there for a long time, leaving behind a putrid trace. I felt dizzy, lightheaded. My thoughts scattered, and the oppressive air seemed to close in on me. I could no longer tell where the car was going. The roads had become a blur, and the night felt endless. My breath quickened, and I tried to steady myself, but every passing second seemed to stretch out longer than the last. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that I wasn't just riding in a taxi. I was being watched. Without thinking, I leaned forward and tried to open the door, my fingers fumbling with the handle. But it wouldn't budge. It was locked. Panic surged through me, my pulse racing. I yanked at the door, desperately trying to escape, but it remained immovable, as if the car itself was holding me prisoner. I turned to the driver, my voice trembling, "Please, stop the car. I need to get out." But he didn't respond. Not a word. Not even a glance. He just kept driving, his hands gripped firmly on the wheel, his face still blank and emotionless. My voice rose, becoming more frantic, "Stop the car." But there was no response. It was as if I didn't exist to him at all. Suddenly, I heard something scratching at the car's exterior. It was soft at first, just a faint noise, but it grew louder. Closer. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. It sounded like nails dragging against metal. I pressed myself against the door, trying to shrink away from the noise, but it was everywhere. It was closing in. In a desperate, instinctual move, I kicked at the door. The metal groaned under the pressure, but it didn't open. I kicked again, harder this time. And then finally it gave way. The door swung open, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of the car, stumbling as I hit the cold ground. My heart was pounding in my ears as I forced myself to run, to escape the suffocating terror that had taken hold of me. I ran, not knowing where I was going, just driven by the need to put as much distance between myself and the taxi as possible. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the trees around me twisting and creaking in the wind. My breath came in ragged gasps, and my legs burned with exhaustion. But I didn't dare stop. Eventually, I spotted a faint light in the distance, a weak, flickering glow that seemed to call to me. I stumbled toward it, desperate for safety. As I got closer, I saw an old house, its windows dimly lit. And there, parked behind the house, was the taxi. The red tail lights blinked at me from the shadows, like eyes staring from the dark. I froze. How could this be? I had been running for what felt like hours. How could the taxi have gotten here before me? The door to the house creaked open, and a middle-aged woman stepped out. Her face was calm, almost detached, as she looked at me. "You just jumped out of that taxi, didn't you?" she asked. Her voice was eerily calm, as if she had been expecting me. I nodded, unable to speak. I was too shaken, too terrified to say anything. She listened to my story, her expression unchanging, then shook her head slowly. "You're not the first. That driver has been wanted by the police for years. But no one ever finds him. Every time they search, he vanishes." The police arrived the next morning, but the taxi and the driver were gone, completely vanished. There were no tracks, no traces of the car. Even the ride I had taken was wiped from my app, as if it had never happened. It was as though the entire experience had been erased from existence. If you ever find yourself needing a taxi late at night, remember this story. Trust your instincts. If something feels off, if the driver seems strange or the route feels wrong, don't hesitate to get out. Don't ignore the signs. There are things in the dark, things you can't see, that might not want you to leave. Always stay alert. And never forget, not all drivers are who they seem to be. I learned that lesson the hard way, and now I live with the knowledge that some rides don't end where they're supposed to. It was a typical Chicago evening, cool and crisp, with the buzz of the city still echoing around the streets even as night fell. I'd just wrapped up a business meeting and was eager to head home, tired from the long day and the tedious discussions. As I walked down the sidewalk, I decided to call a taxi instead of using ride-sharing. I felt it would be safer, more reliable. When the cab pulled up, I didn't think twice. The driver, a man in his late 40s, was wearing a short, graying beard, a dark hoodie, and a baseball cap. His face was unremarkable, his expression unreadable. He nodded at me as I climbed into the back seat, muttered a low greeting, and asked where I needed to go. I told him my address, and we were off. The streets of Chicago flashed by as the car navigated the busy avenues. But there was something strange about the way he drove. He was slow, deliberate. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming it was just an older driver or maybe the traffic. I settled back into the seat, staring out the window as the buildings and neon lights slowly passed. But then, something caught my eye, something out of place. Beneath the driver's seat, slightly hidden by shadows, there was a glint of metal. As the car hit a bump in the road, the angle shifted, and I saw it more clearly: a small, sharp knife, lying loosely under the seat. My stomach dropped. I didn't want to overreact, so I quickly glanced away, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling creeping up my spine. But the longer I sat there, the more I couldn't ignore it. Why would he have a knife so openly in his car? Was it just for protection? Or something else? I tried to push the thought out of my head, telling myself I was being paranoid. But the weight of that small, sharp object seemed to hang in the air, making it harder and harder to breathe normally. I told myself I would get out of the car at the next stop. Maybe I was just being overly cautious, but something about this whole situation felt wrong. When I saw a gas station up ahead, I figured it was the perfect place to ask the driver to stop. "Can you stop at the gas station over there?" I asked casually, trying to sound as if nothing was wrong. But he didn't respond. At first, I thought maybe he hadn't heard me. I repeated myself, louder this time, but still no reaction. He kept his eyes fixed straight ahead, his hands firmly on the wheel. No acknowledgement. No shift in his posture. It was as though he didn't even hear me. A tight knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. This wasn't right. My heart began to race as I realized we were still moving down a road that led further away from the city, not closer. The street lights outside were few and far between, casting long, broken shadows across the pavement. I could barely make out the details of the street now. It felt like we were moving deeper into some unfamiliar, forgotten part of the city, far from where I'd asked to be dropped off. The silence in the car was suffocating. The air was thick with tension. I glanced nervously out the window, trying to think of my options. But the more I thought about it, the less I felt in control. I was starting to feel trapped. The familiar hum of the engine was now a constant reminder that we were moving farther and farther away from safety. I took out my phone and turned on the voice memo app, pretending to make a call. I spoke as naturally as I could, even though my voice felt shaky. "Just in a taxi, almost there," I said, making sure I sounded calm and collected. I glanced up at the driver, who was still eerily silent, his eyes fixed ahead. But then, from somewhere in the front seat, I heard his voice, quiet, barely audible. "Don't talk about those things. People don't come back." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I froze. I tried to make sense of what he had just said. Was I imagining things? Was he talking about something specific? Or was I simply in too deep at this point, my mind starting to unravel? The car kept driving, farther and farther from the familiar lights of the city, and into what felt like a desolate, empty world. I looked out the window again, but now the streets were completely dark, the occasional flicker of a street lamp all that remained of any signs of life. The city had faded into the distance, swallowed up by the oppressive blackness. The buildings and sounds of Chicago were long gone, replaced by the ominous silence of the night. I felt a sharp pang of panic. Where are we going? I thought, my breath quickening. Why is he driving so far out? Then, as if to confirm my worst fears, the taxi turned sharply down an alleyway, one I didn't recognize. The narrow, dimly lit path was lined with dark, abandoned buildings on either side. The atmosphere had shifted completely. It was no longer just an uncomfortable ride, it was now something darker. Something was very, very wrong. My heart pounded in my chest, and I couldn't sit still anymore. I pressed my hand against the window, hoping to find some escape, but there was no way out. Panic surged through me, and without thinking, I reached for the hazard lights and turned them on, desperately trying to attract attention. I've been kidnapped. I shouted, my voice cracking as I felt my grip on reality slip. But the driver didn't respond. He didn't even flinch. His voice, calm and almost detached, came from the front seat again. You shouldn't do that, he said quietly, his tone completely devoid of emotion. It won't help. It was as if he knew exactly what I was trying to do and had already decided it would be useless. He reached down and casually turned off the flashing lights, his hands still gripping the wheel. The chill that ran through me was paralyzing. I knew in that moment that I was completely at his mercy. The taxi came to a stop in the middle of the alley, and for a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Time felt suspended, like the world had stopped spinning. My hands shook as I glanced at the door. I had no other choice. Without hesitation, I flung the door open and scrambled out of the car. I didn't even care that the ground was cold and rough beneath my feet. All I cared about was getting away. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I ran into the darkness, my heart pounding louder than my footsteps, hoping that somehow, I could outrun whatever nightmare this was. I ran for what seemed like miles, my breath coming in ragged gasps, until I finally stumbled upon a gas station. I was breathless, panicked, barely able to speak as I stumbled inside, telling the attendant everything that had happened. His face drained of color, and without wasting any time, he called the police. The officers arrived quickly, taking my statement and checking the cameras, but there was nothing to corroborate my story. No trace of the taxi. No record of the ride. The gas station's cameras showed no sign of the car, and the app had no record of the trip either. It was as if the entire event had been erased from existence. I felt like I was losing my mind. Had it all been a bad dream? Had I imagined the whole thing? But the fear that had gripped me felt too real, and the voice memo on my phone was all that remained of that nightmare. The police couldn't explain it, and neither could I. All I knew was that I had been part of something sinister, something that couldn't be explained by logic or reason. To anyone reading this, please, I beg of you, be cautious when you're in a taxi late at night. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. If the driver seems off, or if the route feels strange, don't hesitate to get out of the car. Always let someone know your location, and never let your guard down. I don't know how many others have experienced something like this, but I'll never forget the feeling of being trapped in that car, or the coldness in that driver's voice. Stay safe, stay alert, and remember, not every taxi is a safe ride.